The dragon cult emerged in the earliest days of Nordic history, rising long before the founding of cities, clans, or kingdoms. In those ancient centuries, when dragons still soared freely across the skies and their shadows stretched across the tundra like dark wings of fate, the people believed them to be divine beings. Not merely powerful, but cosmic embodiments of time, destiny, and the forces that shaped the world. The cult began not as an organized religion, but as a quiet surrender, a recognition that mortals lived beneath the gaze of forces so vast they could only kneel. Villages scattered across the harsh landscapes of early Skyrim built simple stone monuments where they left offerings of grain, meat, and carved idols, hoping to curry favor with dragons who circled above the clouds. Over generations, these small practices grew into a vast and structured faith. Priests rose from among the most devoted, chosen for their ability to read the skies and interpret the will of dragons. These priests were not elected, they were selected, often after experiencing visions brought on by long fasts atop mountain cliffs or by sleeping among dragon effigies carved from bone. Their authority grew as the dragons took notice, and when a priest's voice resonated with even the faintest echo of a dragon's shout, it was taken as divine confirmation. These men and women became the revered dragon priests, mortals elevated to near mythic status, who spoke for beings older than the world as it was known. The temples they built became monuments to power, hidden deep within forests, high atop mountains, or buried beneath layers of stone. These temples were designed according to strict rules that reflected the cult's worldview. Entrances often faced the direction of sunrise, honoring the belief that Alduin, the firstborn of Akatosh, brought dawn to the world with his wings. Inside, halls were lined with reliefs carved by patient hands, depicting dragons coiling through the sky, priests raising their arms in worship, and great battles where mortals bowed in awe rather than fear. These carvings were not purely decorative. They were teaching tools, reminders carved in stone for followers who could not read the priestly scripts. The cult believed dragons breathed not merely fire, but truth. Their flames were seen as purifying light, burning away weakness and illuminating purpose. Rituals involving fire were frequent. Followers gathered in wide chambers where incense burned in braziers shaped like open dragon maws. They chanted in deep, rhythmic tones meant to mimic the cadence of draconic speech. Those who could match the rhythm closely were believed to be favored, and many devoted their entire lives to achieving this resonance. Some spent years training their voices, stretching their vocal cords with strange breathing exercises designed to strengthen their ability to project. The greatest priests displayed uncanny power, able to rattle stone or extinguish torches simply by altering the tone of their chanting. The hierarchy within the dragon cult was strict. At the top were the dragon priests, each serving a specific dragon who acted as both mentor and deity. Beneath the priests were the acolytes, who carried out rituals, maintained temples, and upheld the moral laws of the faith. At the lowest level were common worshippers, who brought offerings and performed seasonal rites. These commoners lived in constant awareness of the dragons overhead. The sound of wings was not a threat, it was a blessing. Dragons choosing to land near a village was interpreted as an honor, even when those encounters left devastation in their wake. The cult taught that suffering in the presence of dragons was a sign of divine attention, a trial meant to strengthen the spirit. Within the deepest chambers of temples, priests practiced rituals that blurred the line between the mortal and divine. They believed that wearing masks carved in the likeness of dragons allowed them to commune more easily with their masters. Each mask was imbued with enchantments of immense power, shaped through ancient crafting knowledge long lost to time. The priests performed rites in which they sat in complete darkness for days, surrounded by the scent of burning herbs, waiting for visions to guide them. They fasted, chanted, and meditated until their consciousness drifted, seeking dreamlike states where dragons spoke in thunderous whispers. The masks became symbols of authority, but also conduits for communication between worlds. Even the architecture of dragon cult temples reflected their beliefs. Hallways were designed to funnel sound, amplifying even the softest whispers into haunting echoes. Vast underground chambers held stone coffins carved with meticulous runework, where the most devoted followers were interred. These coffins were not simply graves, they were safeguards. The cult believed that the power surrounding a dragon priest was eternal, allowing them to continue their duties even in death. Their corpses were treated with oils and herbs meant to preserve them, and their tombs were filled with relics to aid them in the afterlife. The Draugr who guard these tombs today are remnants of this system warriors who swore oaths so binding that even time and death could not unshackle them. The dragon priests themselves were feared and revered in equal measure. Their mastery of the voice allowed them to perform feats that blurred the lines between rituals and miracles. They could call forth blasts of wind strong enough to throw back armies, ignite fires with a single breath, or bend the will of mortals with a single word. These abilities were earned through decades of devotion, guided by dragons who recognized potential in their mortal servants. The bond between a dragon and a priest was sacred, a relationship rooted in mutual respect rather than dominance. Priests often spent seasons living atop mountain peaks in communion, returning only when their presence was required. Dragons communicated with their priests, not solely through shouts, but through dreams, omens, and natural signs. A sudden storm could signify displeasure. A clear night sky marked contentment. The movement of animals during certain rituals was analyzed for meaning. Priests studied these signs constantly, believing the natural world reflected the dragon's will. This constant searching for divine intention shaped their worldview. Everything carried significance. Every gust of wind held meaning. Every shadow cast by firelight could be interpreted as a message. As centuries passed, the cult expanded across Skyrim. New temples were built, each one dedicated to a specific dragon. Mountaintops were carved to form perches for visiting dragons. Villages offered tribute in the form of labor, artifacts, or even their children who were raised within the cult to become priests or warriors. These children, taken at a young age, were trained in ancient languages, chanting, martial arts, and the handling of enchanted relics. They grew up in dimly lit halls surrounded by stone, their lives shaped entirely by devotion. Many never saw the outside world except during pilgrimage, and even then they walked in silence beside their mentors, carrying ceremonial staffs bound with dragon bone fragments. Deep within these temples were chambers designed specifically for dragons. Caverns were carved with ceilings as high as the sky, allowing dragons to rest in their shrines. These dragons were often adorned with offering scarves dyed in sacred colors, golden rings, or carved idols placed near their talons. Priests approached these spaces with utmost reverence, stepping forward only when they felt the dragon's permission through subtle movements or soft growls. The bond between priest and dragon was palpable. Many believed they could hear one another's thoughts through shared breaths. The cult's power grew to such heights that entire tribes submitted willingly. Those who resisted were often destroyed by dragons acting on what they perceived as righteous will. The cult did not view itself as tyrannical. Its members believed they were guiding mortals toward their rightful place. Worship was not meant to be a burden. It was presented as an honor. The cult preached that dragons embodied time itself, and by serving them, mortals aligned themselves with the universe's natural order. This belief created unshakable loyalty, allowing the cult to thrive for generations. But as all powers do, the cult's authority eventually invited rebellion. Mortals grew weary of the burden, of the sacrifices, of the belief that their lives belonged to creatures who cared little for their survival. When the Dragon War erupted, it was not merely a conflict between mortals and dragons, it was the collapse of a belief system that had held firm for centuries. Temples burned, priests fell, and dragons fled or fought to defend what remained. The aftermath left scars on the land that can still be felt today, echoes in ruins, whispers in barrows, remnants of dragon-perched halls carved into mountainsides. Yet despite the cult's downfall, its presence lingers. The Draugrs still rise to defend their sacred sites, bound by oaths older than memory. The masks worn by the priests remain potent remnants of ancient magic. The walls carved with draconic symbols still carry a faint hum when touched, and beneath layers of snow and time, the story of the dragon cult persists, quiet, haunting, and waiting for those who seek its mysteries. Long before the dragon cult possessed sprawling temples or grand rituals, their earliest sites of worship began as simple stone circles built on windswept cliffs. These circles were constructed in places where the breath of the world seemed strongest, where gusts of wind rolled across the land with a tone that resembled a distant roar. The earliest priests believed these winds were the soft murmurs of dragons speaking across great distances. They gathered in these open spaces at dawn, raising their hands as the sun crept over the horizon, imagining the fiery breath of Alduin warming the sky. When dragons began to notice these gatherings, swooping overhead in slow, sweeping arcs, the priests interpreted these movements as acknowledgments. Thus, the cult grew not from commands issued by dragons, but from mortals reaching upward with a mixture of fear and awe. In time, the cult began carving stone monoliths that marked important locations. These stones were inscribed with primitive runes that captured the essence of their beliefs. Some stones recorded the appearance of dragons in specific valleys, while others marked sites where priests had received visions. These monoliths became early spiritual guideposts, each one humming faintly with ancient enchantments. When storms swept across these stones, their runes occasionally glowed as lightning reflected off their slick surfaces. People living nearby believed this was the dragons speaking through the storm, sending warnings or blessings. Even today, many Nordic travelers pause near these forgotten stones, sensing a faint charge in the air, as if old power is still listening. As the cult expanded, the role of dragon priests became more complex. They were expected not just to interpret omens, but to embody the will of the dragons. Their training was harsh, designed to strip away all earthly attachments. A novice priest spent several years in isolation before being allowed to even glimpse a dragon. They fasted for extended periods, learned to ignore the sting of cold, and practiced meditations that required them to remain silent and still for hours at a time. It was said that a true priest needed to empty their mind completely, becoming a vessel into which draconic knowledge could pour. Only when a novice achieved this level of clarity did they receive a mask, a symbol of their transformation into a living servant of the dragon kind. These masks were among the cult's greatest treasures. Each was crafted from rare, magically infused materials and enchanted to resonate with specific schools of draconic power. Some masks amplified the priest's voice, allowing them to produce reverberations that could shake stone. Others granted resistance to frost or fire, blessings mimicking the natural armor of dragons. The masks were so revered that removing one outside of ritual was seen as disrespectful to the dragon it represented. Priests slept with their masks by their sides, keeping them close as symbols of identity and spiritual connection. When a priest died, their mask was placed upon their face and sealed to their skin with oils and binding spells, ensuring the mask would remain with them in the afterlife. Temples dedicated to the cult were often built in places of immense natural beauty or danger, selected intentionally to reflect the divine presence of dragons. Mountain passes shrouded in mist, cliffs surrounded by perpetual storms, frozen lakes that reflected the sky like mirrors. These locations were chosen because they felt alive. Priests believed dragons preferred places where nature's voice was strongest, where wind, water, and stone sang together in harmony. The temples themselves often blended seamlessly into their surroundings. Instead of building gaudy structures, the cult carved their sanctuaries directly into the earth, hollowing mountainsides or tunneling through bedrock to create vast subterranean chambers. Within these chambers, the cult stored relics used in rites of worship. Dragonbone altars stood at the center of most sanctuaries, each carved with symbols representing the flow of time. Dragon priests used these altars to focus their meditations, drawing power from the resonance between bone and stone. Candles crafted from oils extracted from rare flowers illuminated these spaces with an eerie blue glow, casting shifting shadows across carved reliefs. Some of these reliefs depicted dragons in flight, while others illustrated rituals performed during great celestial alignments. The cult believed the stars themselves were tied to dragonkind, and their most sacred ceremonies were held during nights when constellations aligned in patterns interpreted as draconic messages. One such ritual involved a practice known as breath binding. Priests gathered in large circles and inhaled deeply in coordinated cycles, mimicking the breathing patterns of dragons. These breaths were synchronized with chants written in the ancient dragon tongue. Participants believed this act allowed them to temporarily synchronize their souls with the will of their dragon patron. Witnesses described these gatherings as unsettling yet beautiful. The sound of dozens of voices chanting in deep, rhythmic tones echoed like thunder rolling through stone. Torches seemed to flicker in time with the breaths, as though the air itself responded. The cult also kept detailed records of dragon behavior, tracking their migrations, hunting patterns, and appearances. These records were carved into long stone tablets, stored in special chambers known as demi-archives. Unlike typical libraries, demi-archives were designed to be experienced rather than read. The walls echoed the voices of readers subtly, creating strange reverberations that made it feel as though the stone itself was whispering the information. Scholars from later eras who discovered these chambers reported an overwhelming sense of presence, as if they were surrounded by an unseen audience. The dragons themselves treated the cult with varying degrees of interest. Some dragons saw mortals as useful tools, worthy of receiving a fraction of their knowledge. Others viewed the cult with mild amusement, indulging their worship the way one might tolerate the loyalty of smaller creatures. A rare few formed genuine bonds with their priests, forging connections rooted in mutual respect. These bonds allowed priests to access powerful forms of knowledge, expanding their mastery of the voice in ways that astonished even their mentors. The dragons taught these priests the subtle art of tonal manipulation, learning how to use pitch, breath, and force to influence the world around them. Such teachings formed the backbone of many of the cult's most secretive rituals. The relationship between dragons and their priests extended into the afterlife. According to ancient writings, a dragon priest did not truly die. Rather, their soul entered a dormant state, waiting for their dragon to call them forth again when needed. This belief drove the practice of entombment. Priests were embalmed and placed into sarcophagi deep within their temples, surrounded by draugr who swore oaths to guard them. These Draugr, often warriors of great renown, accepted undeath willingly, believing their service would continue long after mortal flesh failed. Through binding spells, their bodies were preserved in a state between life and death, awakening only when intruders disturbed the sanctity of the tomb. The cult used Draugr not as soldiers in war, but as eternal guardians of knowledge. Many tombs contain chambers filled with relics too powerful or dangerous for common mortals. Dragon bone staves, enchanted rune books, and ceremonial blades saturated with ancient magic rest in these crypts, guarded by Draugr capable of wielding them with frightening precision. Some of these weapons were never meant to be used in battle. Instead, they played roles in rituals designed to shape the flow of energy throughout temples. When chanting filled these halls, the relics glowed with light that pulsed in time with the rhythm of the priests' voices. As time passed and mortal kingdoms grew more ambitious, the cult became increasingly rigid. Their rituals grew more elaborate, their punishments more severe. Some factions within the cult insisted on harsher forms of devotion, demanding greater sacrifices of time, labor, and even life. Villages that once celebrated the presence of dragons began to fear the cult, not the dragons themselves. Whispers spread of priests who enforced loyalty through intimidation, insisting that questioning the will of dragons was a path towards spiritual ruin. This shift in attitude eventually sowed seeds of rebellion. Mortals were no longer willing to accept their place at the bottom of the hierarchy. They wanted freedom from the oppressive reverence expected of them, freedom to shape their own destinies, rather than bending their lives to the whims of beings who treated their existence as trivial. When the Dragon War finally erupted, the cult tried desperately to maintain control. Priests performed rituals designed to summon storms, ignite fires, and channel the fury of their dragon patrons into the battlefield. Dragons responded by laying waste to villages and strongholds, convinced that mortals had betrayed the natural order. For years, the conflict raged, leaving scars across Skyrim still visible today. When Alduin fell out of time, the cult's backbone shattered. Without their divine leader, priests lost their sense of direction. Many fled, others hid, and some remained entombed with their masks, awaiting a future that would never come. Yet, despite the cult's collapse, remnants of their power linger throughout Skyrim. Sacred sites still hum faintly beneath moonlight, ancient words etched into stone still resonant with magic. Draugr continue their restless watch, emerging from the shadows when footsteps disturb their slumber. The masks worn by dragon priests remain potent relics, capable of granting abilities that echo their original divine intent. And in remote corners of Skyrim, where the wind carries strange tones and shadows writhe unnaturally, some claim they can still feel the presence of the cult waiting, listening, dreaming. Deep beneath Skyrim's mountains, far below the frostbitten peaks that pierce the sky, lie the oldest sanctuaries of the dragon cult places, carved so precisely into bedrock that even after thousands of years, the stone feels untouched by time. These sanctuaries were not meant to be seen by common followers. They formed a hidden network reserved for priests whose devotion had surpassed mortal bounds. To reach these places, one had to pass through narrow tunnels where air hung heavy with ancient incense, down staircases that spiraled deeper until the world above felt like a distant dream. The silence in these depths was absolute. Even the faintest breath echoed like the whisper of something ancient stirring in the dark. Priests believed that silence itself was a blessing, a reminder that humans existed only as quiet guests within the dragon's eternal dominion. In one such sanctuary, legends speak of a chamber known as the Heart of Scales, a vast circular hall whose ceiling vanished into darkness. Hundreds of chains hung from the unseen heights above, each suspending a carved stone scale inscribed with portions of the dragon language. Each scale was said to resonate faintly, producing tones that harmonized with one another like a distant choir. Priests gathered here to meditate, surrounding themselves with these subtle vibrations. They believed the sound created a bridge between the mortal world and the realm of dragons, a frequency that allowed their thoughts to drift upward like smoke. To sit beneath those hanging scales was to feel washed clean, as if carried by an unseen wind. While no living soul has found the heart of scales in modern times, stories passed down through crumbling manuscripts describe a feeling of unshakable serenity that lingered long after leaving its halls. The cult also maintained sites of pilgrimage where devoted followers journeyed to seek visions. One of the most sacred was a cliffside platform high in the Reach, chiseled so precisely into the mountain face that it appeared as if the stone itself had chosen to part. This place was called the Wind Watch, for here the wind carried unusual sounds that resembled echoing roars. Ancient inscriptions along the cliff marked it as a location where dragons once perched while communicating across great distances. Pilgrims waited for hours, listening to the wind in hopes of hearing subtle messages. Some claimed they received guidance in these whispers, fragmented words, urging them toward deeper devotion or cautioning them of danger. Others heard nothing but the wild howl of mountain storms, though even that sound carried a strange beauty that felt larger than life. The most devout members of the cult often undertook journeys to uncover forgotten words of power. These sacred words were believed to be gifts from the dragons themselves, a glimpse into the language of creation. Priests traveled across mountains and through blizzards to reach word walls carved in remote locations. When they arrived, they performed rituals meant to unlock the meaning of the etched symbols. Each word wall was unique, filled with runes that glowed faintly under moonlight. When spoken aloud by the right voice, these runes released a pulse of energy that rippled through the surrounding stone. Priests taught initiates that each pulse carried fragments of dragon memory, echoes of ancient flights, fiery battles, or the slow turning of eons. Standing before a word wall was considered an honor so profound that even the most stoic priests wept quietly as they felt the wall's energy flow through them. The cult understood that power demanded sacrifice, and many of their most revered rituals required immense devotion. One such rite involved guarding a temple for an entire season without speaking a word. Participants were forbidden from leaving the temple grounds, forbidden from consuming anything but water and dried herbs, forbidden even from acknowledging their own fatigue. This ritual represented the ideal state of a servant of dragons, silent, enduring, unwavering. Those who completed the season were believed to emerge with heightened senses, attuned to the subtle movements of the world around them. Some described hearing faint hums from the stone under their feet, or feeling shifts in the air that warned of approaching storms. These abilities were seen as signs of spiritual refinement, gifts earned through discipline and self-denial. Another ritual, known as the Vigil of Ashes, took place after major battles. Priests gathered the ashes of fallen followers and spread them in intricate patterns within temple chambers. The designs resembled spirals, wings, or the curling forms of dragons in flight. Fires were lit at the edges, causing the ash to glow faintly. Priests believed this glow represented the lingering essence of those who died serving the cult. They chanted for hours, asking the dragons to guide these souls into whatever afterlife awaited them. The chambers filled with smoke that swirled in hypnotic patterns, rising like ethereal serpents. The Vigil of Ashes was a time of both mourning and reverence, a reminder that even in death, followers remained bound to their faith. Within the cult, Dragons were often regarded as manifestations of different aspects of the world. Alduin embodied time and destiny. Parthenax, before his philosophical transformation, represented wisdom veiled in fire. Others symbolized frost, storms, or the primal forces of nature. Priests categorized dragons not by color or temperament, but by their spiritual function. They believed each dragon played a vital role in maintaining balance across the world. When a dragon passed overhead, the cult recorded its direction, speed, and cry. These observations became part of complex charts stored in temple archives used to track patterns of cosmic significance. Some priests could predict changes in weather or shifts in political tides simply by interpreting the flights of dragons. They saw these creatures as living omens, woven into the fabric of fate. The cult's fascination with omens extended to animals as well. Ravens were considered harbingers of dragon presence. If a flock circled above a village, priests interpreted it as a warning or blessing depending on the context. Wolves howling in unison during certain rituals were said to signify divine approval. Even the behavior of insects had meaning. Priests watched carefully how moths gathered around temple lanterns, their numbers, their movements, their patterns. In the shimmering wings of these small creatures, they claimed to see reflections of truths only dragons fully understood. Despite its rigid structure, the cult was not without internal conflict. Some priests believed dragons should remain distant and aloof, preserving the mystery that defined their divinity. Others insisted dragons should walk openly among mortals, ruling them directly. These ideological divides sometimes escalated into heated debates within temple halls. The echoes of these arguments carried through stone, giving some chambers an unsettling acoustic quality even centuries later. In certain ruins, explorers have reported hearing strange murmurs or the faint impression of voices arguing from distant rooms, though no one else is present. Whether these echoes are remnants of ancient disagreements or tricks of sound within old architecture remains unknown. The cult's decline took years to unfold. Even as rebellion grew, priests remained steadfast in their devotion. They performed rituals pleading with dragons to intervene, to crush the uprising and restore balance. But many dragons, either unwilling or unable to act, watched the conflict unfold. Some withdrew entirely, retreating to mountaintops to observe the changing world from afar. Others fell in battle, their death sending shockwaves of despair through the cult. Temples went dark. Ritual fires burned low. The masks of fallen priests became relics without masters, resting on cold stone altars as dust collected around them. When the Dragon War reached its peak, many cult members retreated into their sanctuaries, believing the conflict to be a temporary distortion of fate. They sealed themselves within their tombs, confident they would one day awaken when dragons reclaimed the skies. Binding spells ensured they could rise as Draugr if their resting places were disturbed. Their bodies did not decay. They remained trapped in a suspended state, their spirits tethered to their duties. These Draugr still rise today when intruders enter their temples, fulfilling oaths forged by a belief stronger than time. Yet not all remnants of the cult are violent. Some sites hold peaceful echoes. In certain forgotten shrines, faint warmth emanates from carvings of dragons, as though the stone remembers the touch of divine beings. Wind moving through old temple corridors carries sounds that resemble distant chanting, comforting rather than frightening. Pools of still water reflect not just one's face, but shifting patterns of light that mimic ancient ritual symbols. Even long after its fall, the cult left traces of beauty, moments of quiet reverence, preserved in the bones of Skyrim. Through ruins, relics, and the restless dead, the dragon cult endures. It lingers in the heavy air of mountain tombs, the eerie calm of abandoned sanctuaries, and the silent hum of ancient word walls. Its presence is not merely historical but atmospheric, woven into the very landscape. And when the wind moves just right across certain cliffs, or the stone underfoot vibrates with a faint, mysterious tone, it feels almost as if the cult is still watching, silent, patient, and waiting. Long before the dragon cult carved sprawling temples into mountainsides, before their priests donned masks that turned them into living symbols of draconic might, they recorded their earliest teachings on simple tablets made of river stone. These stones were smooth, dark, and cool to the touch, collected from riverbeds that glistened in the morning light. Carving tools made from sharpened dragon bone etched primitive runes into their surfaces, runes that captured stories, beliefs, and warnings. These riverstone tablets were carried village to village, serving as the cult's first form of scripture. Many were lost over time, washed away by floods, or shattered during conflicts, but a handful still rest deep in forgotten barrows, their writings barely visible beneath layers of age-worn dust. As the cult's influence spread, they began shaping the world around them with intention. They constructed towering monoliths along the edges of cliffs where the sky opened wide, creating pathways known as dragon roads. These roads were not built for mortals, but as guides for dragons to follow during long flights. Sculptors spent decades chiseling patterns into the stone, swirling designs that mimicked the flow of wind currents, aiding dragons in navigating treacherous valleys and narrow passes. When the sun struck these carvings at the right angle, they shimmered like flowing rivers of light, acting as beacons visible from great heights. Though most of these roads have crumbled, traces of their patterns remain faintly visible, hinting at a time when the cult sought to shape not just the land, but the very skies. Within cult society, the bond between priest and dragon was fundamental. Dragons sensed potential within mortals the way a smith senses impurities in metal. They chose priests, not based on loyalty alone, but on a deeper resonance, a kind of spiritual compatibility. Once chosen, a priest underwent rites that stripped away their old identity. Their hair was cut short, their names were changed to draconic titles, and their pasts were symbolically burned in ceremonial fires. From that moment, they existed only to serve. This transformation was not viewed as loss, but as rebirth. Those who completed the process often walked with altered posture, their movements fluid, yet unnervingly controlled, as though their bodies were guided by unseen rhythms. At the height of the cult's power, dragons frequently visited their temples. When a dragon approached, its roar echoed through the halls like thunder crashing through stone. Acolytes fell to their knees, pressing their foreheads to the ground. The air grew warm, charged with the presence of a being whose very breath could ignite the world. Dragons entered their temples through enormous, arching passageways framed with carvings of wings and flames. These halls were reinforced with layers of enchanted stone capable of withstanding intense heat. When a dragon settled into its shrine, a specially carved alcove with a raised platform, it often surveyed the priests in silent contemplation, assessing their devotion without speaking a word. Dragons communicated with the cult primarily through the language of the voice, but their messages were rarely direct. Priests had to interpret the tone, intensity, and cadence of each shout. A single word could carry multiple meanings, depending on how the dragon shaped its breath. For example, a shout of Yol, meaning fire, could signify approval, warning, anger, or cleansing depending on its pitch. Priests trained for decades to understand these nuances, learning to sense subtle shifts in the air. When dragons wish to convey more complex ideas, they combine gestures, wing movements, tail flicks, changes in pupil dilation with shouts. These interactions formed a sophisticated communication system far beyond ordinary speech. Even the structure of dragon cult temples reflected draconic communication. Halls were designed with angled ceilings and carefully placed pillars that amplified certain frequencies of sound. When priests chanted, the architecture magnified their voices, creating reverberations that traveled through the stone like living currents. Some chambers were constructed with floors made from rare minerals known to vibrate in response to particular tones. During rituals, these floors pulsed faintly, creating a sensation that felt like standing on the back of a slumbering beast. This interplay of sound and structure was central to the cult's belief that the world itself was alive with hidden voices. The cult maintained sacred gardens where they grew herbs and flowers used exclusively for rituals. These gardens were often hidden in secluded valleys or carved into terraces on mountain slopes. The plants themselves were chosen for symbolic significance. Frostbloom, a pale blue flower that thrived in icy soil, represented endurance. Emberroot, with its glowing orange veins, symbolized the breath of dragons. Ghostleaf, nearly translucent in moonlight, was used in potions meant to induce visions. Priests tended these gardens with reverence, believing each plant carried a fragment of draconic essence. When the wind passed through these gardens, the leaves rustled in patterns that many interpreted as whispering voices. Priests also performed rituals involving stone and fire. One of the most sacred was the Rite of Ember Silence, conducted during the winter solstice. During this ritual, priests extinguished all lights within the temple until only a single ember remained glowing in the central brazier. They sat in complete darkness, listening for signs in the crackle of cooling stone and the distant calls of dragons. As the ember dimmed, priests took turns fanning it gently with feathers taken from giant hawks, keeping it alive just long enough to receive visions. Some priests claimed that during the rite, they heard faint footsteps echoing in empty corridors, or saw fleeting images of dragons circling high above. The cult's influence extended beyond its temples into communities under its protection. Villagers offered tribute in the form of crafted goods, food, and raw materials. These offerings were placed at designated stone altars situated along major roads. The altars were unassuming, often decorated with simple carvings of flame or wings. Travelers passing these sites frequently reported feeling watched, even when no one else was present. Some claim they saw faint, shimmering shapes hovering above the altars during certain seasons. Whether these were spirits, illusions, or remnants of ancient enchantments, no one could say for certain. In addition to offerings, villagers marked their homes with protective symbols taught by the cult. These symbols resembled simplified versions of draconic runes, painted above doorways or carved into support beams. They were believed to repel misfortune. Even after the cult collapsed, some families continued using these symbols, unaware of their origins. It is not uncommon to find these markings in remote cabins or old farmhouses throughout Skyrim. Though their original meaning has been lost, the sense of quiet strength they evoke remains. The cult revered specific periods of the year as sacred. The alignment of the moons, the position of the stars, and the cycle of the seasons were all carefully observed. During the longest night of winter, priests believed the veil between worlds was thinnest. They performed ceremonies meant to honor dragons whose spirits had ascended beyond physical form. Fires were lit in spiraling patterns, and priests walked slowly around them while chanting in low, rhythmic tones. The flickering light cast long shadows on the walls, creating shifting silhouettes that seemed to move independently from the priests themselves. The cult also maintained a tradition of forging ceremonial weapons. These weapons were not intended for battle, but for ritual use. Smiths crafted them using techniques taught by dragons, heating metal in flames that burned hotter than any mortal forge could achieve. These blades and staves shimmered with a faint inner glow, as if storing fragments of fire. During certain rites, priests struck these weapons against stone platforms, producing resonant tones that echoed through the temple like distant dragon cries. The sound was said to carry messages to the heavens, communicating the cult's devotion. When a dragon priest grew old, they underwent a final rite known as the Passage of Flame. They entered a deep meditation, allowing their consciousness to drift toward the realm of dragons. This trance could last days. During this period, acolytes tended to the priest's physical body, ensuring it did not weaken prematurely. When the priest finally passed, they were placed within a stone sarcophagus, engraved with intricate runic patterns representing their life's dedication. Their mask, still imbued with power, was set upon their face. Binding spells sealed the lid, and Draugr were appointed as guardians, ensuring the priest remained untouched. These tombs became sacred sites, treated with the same reverence once given to dragons themselves. Even after the cult disappeared from history, markers of its teachings persisted in unexpected places. Certain cliff faces bear carvings of dragon wings that seem almost alive when the sun sets behind them. Rivers occasionally reveal smooth stones with faint runes still visible on their surfaces. Ancient songs sung by wandering bards contain undertones of draconic cadence, their melodies echoing the structure of chants once performed in grand temples. Scholars studying these remnants often remark on the strange feeling that accompanies them, a sense of being observed, evaluated, or quietly remembered. In some of the quietest corners of Skyrim, far from roads and settlements, travelers have reported hearing distant roars that do not match the cry of any living dragon. These sounds echo across empty valleys, carried by winds that seem to come from nowhere. Whether these roars are remnants of ancient battles, harmonics produced by the land, or echoes of dragons who once commanded the skies, no one knows. But in these moments, it feels as though the dragon cult's legacy still breathes through the world. Through carvings, chants, and the silent guardians who still awaken in shadowed tombs, the cult remains woven into Skyrim's very bones. Even in ruin, its presence endures in ancient memory, drifting quietly through snow and wind, waiting to be rediscovered by those who walk carefully enough to hear it. High above the snowy ridges of ancient Skyrim, where the wind carves sharp lines into the mountainsides and the sky turns pale with the cold breath of dawn, the dragon cult once tended to great stone perches carved directly into the cliffs. These perches were immense platforms shaped to resemble the curve of dragon wings, built not for decoration, but as landing sites for dragons who visited the temples below. The craftsmanship of these structures was so precise that even now, long after the cult's fall, the edges remain smooth, unfazed by centuries of storms. When dragons descended upon these perches, the impact sent tremors through the stone, shaking loose icicles and causing the snow to ripple like disturbed water. Priests waiting below took this shaking as a sign of divine presence, a physical reminder of the overwhelming power they served. Near these perches, narrow stairways wound downward into the mountain, their steps carved unevenly as though shaped by alternating hands, human and draconic. These stairways were known as the breath paths, symbolizing the journey mortals took toward enlightenment. Priests ascending the steps were taught to breathe in rhythm with each footfall, mimicking the slow inhalations dragons used before unleashing shouts. This exercise was as much spiritual as physical. The rhythm helped calm the mind, stilling the constant hum of mortal worries until only the presence of the world remained. Those who reached the bottom of the breath paths without breaking their breath cycle were considered spiritually balanced, capable of hearing truths hidden in the world's quieter places. The cult believed that the earth itself held echoes of ancient draconic power, and they built resonance chambers deep within mountains to harness this energy. These chambers were natural caverns augmented with carved columns that vibrated when struck. Priests used polished dragon bone rods to tap the columns in specific sequences, producing tones that resonated so deeply they could be felt in the chest. These tones rippled through the cavern walls, creating shimmering distortions in the air. Some priests claimed these vibrations brought visions, glimpses of dragons flying across ancient skies, or fragments of memory from forgotten battles. Others experienced a profound sense of calm, as though wrapped in the warm presence of an unseen guardian. It was believed the resonance allowed priests to touch the spirits of deceased dragons, easing their passage to the next realm. At the center of many temples stood the Circle of Scales, a ceremonial arena used for important rites. This arena was encircled by raised platforms, carved with images of countless scales that overlapped to form spiraling patterns. When sunlight filtered into the temple at certain angles, the carvings created an illusion of movement, as though the stone scales rippled like the hide of a living dragon. During major gatherings, priests stood within the circle to perform chants that honored their draconic patrons. Their voices wove together into a tapestry of sound that rolled across the stones like thunder. The arena amplified these chants, sending them upward through vents carved into the ceiling. Some legends claim dragons could hear these chants on distant mountaintops, recognizing the voices of their devoted servants. The cult's dedication to preserving the memories of dragons was reflected in their scroll halls, vast libraries carved into the earth where knowledge was recorded not with ink but with carved tablets. Each tablet contained runes that captured events, prophecies, or teachings from the dragons. Scribes trained for years to carve these runes precisely, for even the slightest error could alter the meaning. The halls were dimly lit with glowing crystals harvested from deep within the mountains. These crystals pulsed with a soft amber light, illuminating rows of tablets that stretched far into the shadows. The silence within these halls was so profound that the faint scrape of a chisel echoed like a distant storm, reminding all who worked there of the weight of their duty. One of the most mysterious aspects of the dragon cult was their practice of dream-binding rituals in which priests entered deep meditative states to communicate with dragons through dreams. These rituals took place in secluded chambers lined with soft moss and warmed by geothermal vents. Priests lay upon stone slabs, closing their eyes as acolytes burned fragrant herbs that filled the room with sweet, thick smoke. Slowly, the priests drifted into a trance. They described these dreams as vivid and otherworldly, filled with soaring skies and powerful roars that echoed through endless canyons. Messages from dragons often came as symbolic imagery rather than words, wings folding over mountains to signal protection, flames rising around a crumbling temple to signify approaching danger, or the slow turning of a massive, glowing sphere to represent the passage of time. Not all rituals were serene. Some required immense mental fortitude. One such rite was the trial of stone breath, in which a priest sat before an ancient stone relief carved with dragon tongues. The relief emitted a faint, rhythmic pulse that resonated in the bones. Priests were instructed to match their breathing to this pulse, even when it grew erratic or uncomfortably slow. The trial tested patience and endurance, pushing participants to overcome the fear that arose when breath and pulse fell out of sync. Those who completed the trial were believed to be attuned to the Earth's deeper rhythms, able to predict tremors or sense disturbances in ley lines that coursed beneath Skyrim's surface. The cult's influence extended into rare forms of craftsmanship. Artisans under their guidance specialized in creating ritual vessels made from dragon scales shed naturally over time. These vessels were not used for mundane tasks. They held sacred oils, enchanted waters, or ashes from expired rituals. The scales, hardened by centuries of exposure to wind and flame, shimmered with a natural iridescence. When firelight struck them, the vessels cast dancing reflections across temple walls that resembled flickering wings. Some vessels were engraved with runes meant to amplify the potency of their contents. Others were left plain, their beauty resting in the simplicity of their draconic origin. The cult also prized dragon bone tablets used as meditative tools. These tablets were carved with raised patterns that priests traced with their fingers during long sessions of contemplation. The sensation of sliding fingertips across the etched grooves was said to calm racing thoughts and allow practitioners to connect with the steady, timeless presence of dragon spirits. Some tablets contained labyrinth-like patterns designed to guide the mind toward clarity. Others depicted spirals meant to represent the cycles of time. Even centuries after the cult's fall, these tablets retain a faint warmth to the touch, hinting at ancient enchantments still lingering within the bone. In remote corners of Skyrim, priests built shrines dedicated to individual dragons who favored solitude. These shrines were small, humble structures, little more than carved stones, arranged in patterns reflecting the dragon's nature. A shrine devoted to a frost-breathing dragon, for example, might consist of stones layered with ice that never melted even in summer. Shrines honoring flame-breathing dragons glowed faintly at night, their surfaces warm despite the cold air. Travelers who stumbled upon these places often described feeling watched, as though unseen eyes followed their movements from the surrounding shadows. Animals behaved strangely near these shrines, approaching cautiously or suddenly fleeing without cause. Whether these reactions were remnants of old magic or the influence of dragon spirits, the effect was undeniable. Dragons taught the cult to observe the land closely, reminding them that the world spoke in subtle voices. Priests learned to interpret shifts in wind direction, changes in the color of firelight, and the patterns of ripples on still water. They believed dragons communicated through nature itself, guiding their servants with signs woven quietly into the environment. When the wind carried a low, rumbling tone, priests took it as a sign of impending change. When rivers froze in unusual patterns, it was interpreted as a warning. When fire burned blue instead of orange, priests gathered to discuss what meaning the dragons might be conveying. The cult's ceremonies often centered around large, open courtyards where priests and acolytes gathered beneath the sky. During certain rituals, they traced large, winding symbols in the dirt using staffs tipped with dragon bone. These symbols represented ancient principles: dominion, eternity, transformation. Once the symbols were complete, priests walked their length slowly, chanting as they moved. The combined effect created a kind of moving labyrinth that represented the flow of power between dragons and their followers. Observers described these ceremonies as mesmerizing, each movement fluid and deliberate, each breath synchronized with the rhythm of the chant. When the Dragon War began, the cult attempted to preserve its teachings. Scribes worked tirelessly to carve new tablets, documenting the conflict from the perspective of the faithful. They wrote of dragons retreating into the clouds and priests defending sacred sites against overwhelming odds. These tablets were hidden in secret vaults, sealed with layers of enchanted stone. Many of these vaults have never been found. Some are rumored to lie beneath collapsed mountains or submerged under lakes. Should they ever be discovered, They would offer unparalleled insight into the mindset of a society that lived with dragons as their guiding force. Even though the cult fell, its remnants continue to breathe beneath Skyrim's frozen soil. The faint hum felt in certain barrows, the warmth that lingers on runic stones, the soft glow inside ancient tombs all serve as quiet reminders of a time when mortals walked alongside dragons and the world was shaped by fire, breath, and belief. The echoes of that relationship ripple through the land still, subtle and haunting, waiting for those who move slowly enough to feel them. Hidden deep within the forests of ancient Skyrim were sacred glades where the dragon cult performed rites far removed from the grand stone temples carved into mountains. These glades were quiet sanctuaries, surrounded by towering pines whose branches overlapped so densely that daylight filtered down in thin, shimmering strands. The cult believed these places existed at the intersection of the natural and divine worlds, untouched by mortals except during ritual hours. In these secluded clearings, priests etched spiraling runes into the dirt, using staffs made from petrified wood. These runes, shaped like coiling dragons, represented the cycle of rebirth and destruction that the dragons embodied. During ceremonies, the wind often swept through the trees in sudden, concentrated gusts that seemed to respond to the chanting. Followers interpreted this as the breath of unseen dragons circling just beyond the veil. Some glades were chosen specifically for the way sound moved through them. Priests believed the earth beneath certain patches of forest hummed with ancient energy, and when the right words were spoken aloud, that energy aligned with the cadence of draconic speech. Chanting in these places created a resonance that filled the air like the faint vibration of a struck bell. The soil beneath the priests' feet trembled lightly with each cycle of their voices, offering a sensation both grounding and ethereal. This trembling was not violent but soothing, like standing near a purring creature whose warmth radiated outward in steady waves. Over time, priests learned to use these natural vibrations as a meditative aid, sinking into deep trances that helped them interpret visions or decipher difficult runes. Not all of the cult's sacred places were peaceful. Some were perched high atop jagged peaks where snow lashed at stone and the air thinned with every step. These mountain sanctuaries tested the resolve of even the most devoted priests. One such site, known in old texts as the Whisper Spine, sat along a narrow ridge so exposed that the wind screamed through its cracks day and night. Priests meditated here to strengthen their will, pressing their palms to the icy stone and focusing through blistering gusts that tore at their robes. They believed the wind carried fragments of draconic voices, messages woven into howls and whistles that only those with an unwavering mind could decipher. Many priests left Whisper Spine with a newfound clarity, claiming the wind had spoken to them in tones that bypassed language entirely, seeping directly into the soul. The cult also constructed elaborate mazes beneath certain temples. These mazes, carved into bedrock and illuminated by flickering torchlight, were designed to test spiritual focus. Each path turned sharply, leading initiates through tight corridors where the sound of their footsteps echoed as if the stone were alive. In the deepest sections of these mazes, the walls were carved with dragon eyes, large, unblinking shapes whose pupils glistened strangely when touched by flame. These carvings seemed to follow those who entered, their gaze shifting subtly as adventurers moved through the labyrinth. Initiates believed completing the maze granted them the attention of a dragon spirit who watched over their journey. The carvings themselves were enchanted so that a faint warmth radiated from the pupils, as though imbued with lingering embers. The cult's mastery of enchanted stone extended beyond mazes. Some temples featured walls embedded with crystalline fragments that reacted to sound. When priests chanted, the crystals vibrated with luminescent pulses that rippled like liquid light across the surface. These pulses formed patterns, rings, spirals, shifting lines that reflected the intensity of the chant. Priests used these patterns as diagnostic tools, adjusting their voices based on how the crystals responded. If the light shifted erratically, it meant their intentions faltered. If the patterns flowed smoothly, it signaled perfect harmony between priest and ritual. This interplay of sound and light transformed certain chambers into breathtaking displays of radiant magic, though only the most devoted ever witnessed them. Beyond the temples and glades, the cult maintained hidden observatories carved into cliff faces overlooking valleys. These observatories contained arcane instruments fashioned from dragon bone and iron. Priests used them to track dragon flights and celestial movements, believing the two were interwoven. They charted eclipse cycles, meteor showers, and the subtle shifts of constellations, seeing in these patterns messages from the heavens. During certain nights, when the sky glowed with auroras, the observatories vibrated faintly as the shimmering light reflected off their polished surfaces. Priests recorded these vibrations meticulously, convinced they carried encoded knowledge from ancient dragons watching from beyond the mortal realm. The cult's attention to the natural world extended to water. They believed rivers were the veins of the land, carrying the essence of dragons who shaped its very bones. Some temples were built above underground streams, whose currents produced a musical hum as they moved through narrow channels. Priests meditated beside these waterways, listening for rhythms or shifts in tone that might signify divine messages. They described the sound as soothing and hypnotic, a lullaby whispered by the world itself. In rare cases, the water glowed faintly, illuminated by faintly enchanted minerals carried downstream. This glow was seen as a blessing, and priests collected the water in sacred vessels for use in purification rites. One of the more enigmatic legends surrounding the dragon cult involves their attempts to create sanctuaries where dragons could slumber safely. These sanctuaries were vast caverns with ceilings shaped like protective wings. Priests filled them with fragrant herbs meant to calm the senses and lined the floors with smooth stones warmed by geothermal vents. Here, dragons could land and rest without fear of attack. Priests maintained these sanctuaries with utmost devotion, cleaning every corner and tending every fire. Some dragons reportedly visited these places frequently, trusting the cult enough to let their eyes close fully, a gesture of profound vulnerability. These moments cemented the bond between dragon and priest more deeply than any ritual or chant. The cult also explored ways to preserve memories using sound. In certain temples, long tunnels with curved ceilings were designed to capture chants and store them as lingering echoes. Priests spoke of walking through these hallways and hearing layers of sound whispers from rituals performed decades earlier. These echoes grew faint over time, but their presence remained, a tapestry of overlapping voices that seemed to guide new generations. Some believed these echoes were more than just sound. They thought the tunnels stored fragments of consciousness, moments where the thoughts of past priests remained suspended in the air. Whether true or not, the sensation of walking through such spaces felt like entering the mind of history itself. In addition to preserving memories, the cult tried to understand how dragons perceived time. They believed dragons existed partially outside of it, experiencing moments in sweeping arcs rather than linear progression. To explore this concept, priests conducted experiments involving cycles of light and shadow. They built circular chambers with rotating panels that cast shifting patterns across the floor. Priests observed these patterns for hours, attempting to synchronize their breathing with the pace of the shadows. Some reported entering dreamlike states where past, present, and future blended into a single sensation, a vast, flowing river with no clear beginning or end. They emerged with insights that guided the cult's philosophy for generations, emphasizing the belief that mortal lives were mere ripples upon a much deeper current. Metalwork within the cult held its own significance. Blacksmiths forged ceremonial armor adorned with draconic motifs, curved horns, stylized flames, and intricate patterns inspired by dragon scales. Though not meant for battle, these items were imbued with enchantments meant to stabilize the wearer's mind during rituals. Some pieces were lined with thin layers of dragon bone, believed to harmonize with the heartbeat. When worn during ceremonies, the armor produced a subtle vibration felt through the chest, steady and grounding. Followers described the sensation as comforting, like being wrapped in a protective presence. The cult even influenced the layout of entire settlements. Communities aligned their streets with the cardinal directions favored by dragons, believing it allowed divine energy to flow unimpeded. Buildings were constructed with slanted roofs meant to mimic the arch of dragon wings. Some villages included circular plazas where children learned simple draconic syllables as part of everyday life. These syllables were said to bring luck, though their precise meanings were often forgotten. Even after the cult fell, these architectural habits endured, lingering in the design of remote Nordic towns. And throughout all of this, the rituals, the shrines, the chants, the cult never forgot its core belief that dragons embodied a truth larger than mortal understanding. They saw dragons not as tyrants, but as guardians of a cosmic order written in flame and breath. Even in ruin, that belief clings to Skyrim's bones. In the quiet hum of wind through a barrow, in the faint warmth of a stone touched by sunlight, in the echo of a distant roar across the mountains, echoes of the cult remain, silent but enduring, woven into the very rhythm of the world. Far in the northern reaches of ancient Skyrim, where the winds sharpen into icy blades, and the nights stretch long and silent beneath a sky rippling with auroras, the dragon cult established ceremonial encampments that existed only during the coldest months of the year. These winter encampments were not built of stone or wood, but formed from towering slabs of ice carved into spirals and archways. Priests believed that ice was a perfect symbol of stillness, patience, and the unchanging nature of dragons. When torches flickered nearby, the carved ice refracted light in swirling patterns that resembled ghostly wings unfurling. The area glowed with a quiet beauty that made the harsh cold almost feel sacred, as though the land itself bowed in devotion. Within these frozen sanctuaries, the cult practiced rituals that could not be performed anywhere else. The cold air amplified the tone of their chants, allowing even the softest syllable to carry across vast distances. Priests stood in circles, their breath rising as faint clouds that mingled with the drifting snow. They sang in voices designed to mimic the slow exhalation of dragons, each phrase rising and falling with hypnotic rhythm. The sound swept across the tundra like a rolling tide, echoing softly off distant cliffs. Some locals claimed that on certain nights, dragons answered with faint roars carried by the wind, though no dragon was seen. Whether these roars were true replies or illusions crafted by the land's natural acoustics remains one of the many mysteries surrounding the cult. During the darkest nights of winter, priests observed rituals meant to align their spirits with the cycles of the auroras. They believed the shimmering lights were physical manifestations of draconic power flowing across the atmosphere like rivers of energy. When the auroras brightened, priests recorded the colors and patterns as omens. Green bands signified balance. Purple waves symbolized a shift in destiny. Flickering gold ribbons meant danger was approaching. Priests would stand beneath the lights for hours, eyes lifted toward the swirling sky, feeling the air hum with a charge that seemed to resonate within their chests. Some claimed the lights whispered faint sounds, curiously melodic tones that matched the cadence of ancient chants. When the cult expanded southward into warmer lands, they adapted their practices to new environments. In regions dominated by dense forests, they crafted sanctuaries where dragon effigies were woven from living vines. These vine dragons were immense, their bodies coiled around wooden pillars or cascading down cliff walls. Priests tended to them meticulously, pruning branches so the structures remained lifelike. During ceremonies, they draped the effigies with flowers, whose bright colors symbolized vitality and growth. Wind rustling through the leaves gave the impression that the vine dragons were breathing. When sunlight pierced the canopy, shadows danced across the carvings in ways that resembled scales shifting beneath flesh. These natural shrines were considered among the most peaceful of the cult's creations, blending seamlessly with the world around them. In the marshlands of ancient Hallmarch, where fog clings low to the ground and water glistens like obsidian, the cult constructed shrines that seemed to float above pools of still, black water. These shrines were built on stone platforms supported by wooden pylons, their surfaces carved with runes meant to repel decay. Priests believed these watery sanctuaries allowed them to commune with dragon spirits associated with mystery and shadow. They lit oil lamps whose flames wavered gently, casting distorted reflections across the water. These reflections often took on strange shapes that seemed alive coiling forms or flickering outlines that resembled sleeping dragons. The priests interpreted these illusions as messages from the spirit world, believing the water itself was a portal between realities. Some temples contained hidden rooms, accessible only by speaking specific draconic phrases. These rooms were small but intricately decorated, their walls lined with layers of gold leaf runes that shimmered like embers in torchlight. Inside, priests stored relics meant only for those who had achieved the highest spiritual clarity. One such relic was a sphere crafted from interlocking dragon bone rings that spun slowly when touched, producing a low humming sound that echoed the deep calls of dragons flying at great heights. Another relic, shaped like a jagged claw, emitted faint warmth that grew stronger when held by someone with attuned breath patterns. Such relics were said to guide priests toward enlightenment, though the precise nature of their effects was known only to the few allowed to use them. One of the most fascinating aspects of the cult was their belief that dragon spirits could inhabit natural formations. Priests claimed that dragons who reached immense age or suffered grievous wounds sometimes shed their physical forms, allowing their spirits to meld with the world. These spirits could become part of rivers, mountains, or even storms. The cult identified locations where the presence of such spirits felt strong. A particular peak in the Reach, for example, was believed to house the essence of a dragon who once served as a guardian of the western borders. Travelers reported hearing faint growls when climbing the mountain, or feeling sudden gusts of warm air amid freezing winds. Priests visited the peak to offer respect, carving spirals into the stone to honor the spirit's lingering presence. In ancient records, the cult described dragon spirits that dwelled in storms. They believed the crackling of thunder was the echo of forgotten shouts, and lightning was the flash of draconic anger streaking across the sky. When such storms approached, priests gathered on mountaintops, letting the wind tear at their robes as they opened their arms to the heavens. They chanted in sync with the thunder, believing the storm carried the voices of their long-departed masters. These storm rituals were considered dangerous but profoundly spiritual. Some priests returned from them, trembling with awe, claiming to have glimpsed enormous translucent shapes moving through the clouds. The cult's understanding of death was shaped entirely by their devotion to dragons. They did not fear the end of life, believing it merely a transition. When a devoted member passed away, their body was prepared with oils mixed from rare herbs that emitted soothing aromas reminiscent of warm stone. Draugr guardians were bound to protect their resting places, not to preserve the corpse, but to safeguard the soul's journey. Priests believed that if a tomb were disturbed, the soul might be jolted back before completing its passage, causing unrest. Thus, the presence of Draugr was seen as a sacred responsibility protectors, ensuring the departed reached the next realm undisturbed. The cult's influence extended even into the designs of weapons used by select followers. Though the majority of their ceremonial weapons were purely symbolic, some were crafted with the intent to channel the voice. These weapons featured hollow channels within the blade or staff, designed to resonate when their wielder spoke draconic syllables. When used correctly, the weapon produced a harmonic pulse that amplified the power of the shout. These items were exceedingly rare. Only the most skilled priests could wield them without risking damage to their own voices. In the hands of a master, however, they created an effect akin to thunder rippling from the steel. Despite their strict hierarchy, the cult fostered mentorship between priests and acolytes. Young acolytes learned early that mastery of the voice required not only strength, but emotional discipline. They were taught to quiet the mind, loosen tension in the chest, and breathe with steady intention. Priests guided their charges through complex breathing techniques derived from dragon physiology. Some sessions took place in frigid environments where cold air forced acolytes to regulate their breath more carefully. Others occurred near volcanic vents, their warmth testing endurance. It was said the sound of an acolyte's breath during training revealed everything about their character. A wavering rhythm signaled fear or hesitation. A steady, deep pattern indicated readiness for greater teachings. The cult also encouraged silent walks across sacred landscapes. These walks could last hours or even days, depending on the journey's purpose. Priests moved through mountains, forests, or coastal cliffs without speaking, listening only to the rhythm of their steps and the sounds of the world. They believed silence allowed them to hear messages hidden within nature. Some claimed that during these walks, they heard the distant rumble of dragons, even when none were present. Others described fleeting shadows passing overhead too large to belong to any known bird. Whether these experiences were mystical or imagined, they shaped the cult's worldview, reinforcing the belief that dragons were ever present, even when unseen. Throughout the centuries, the dragon cult shaped Skyrim's landscape through their rituals, architecture, and reverence for power. Though the temples have crumbled, the Draugr still stand watch, and the echoes of chanting fade into forgotten stone. The essence of the cult remains woven into the land, in the soft hum of wind through ancient ruins, in the warmth of a candle that refuses to extinguish inside a sealed barrow, in the distant roar that reverberates across a valley with no visible source. The past whispers quietly. The cult may be gone, but the world remembers them. Their presence lingers like a shadow at twilight, silent, solemn, and enduring. Deep within the valleys, where mist clings to the ground like a living veil, the dragon cult built sanctuaries so hidden that even local villagers believed the land swallowed them whole. These places were not marked on any map, nor were they meant to be found by wandering travelers. Priests sought locations where nature felt untouched, where the air held an eerie stillness as though quietly listening. One such sanctuary lay beside a lake whose surface remained unnaturally calm even during storms. The water acted as a near-perfect mirror, reflecting the surrounding mountains with such clarity that priests treated it as a divine portal. They believed dragon spirits could appear on this mirror-like surface as rippling illusions, speaking through shifting patterns in the water. On certain nights, when the moon dipped low and its reflection stretched long across the lake, the water glowed faintly, illuminating the runes carved into the stone steps leading down to the shore. Just beyond that lake stood a forest known for its unusual resonance. When the wind blew from a certain direction, the trees produced a low, vibrating hum that echoed throughout the valley. Priests interpreted this hum as a sign of draconic presence woven into the land. They built wooden platforms high in the branches, where they sat for hours listening to the shifting tones of the forest. These listening posts were simple structures with smooth floors and open sides, allowing priests to immerse themselves fully in the sounds of the world. Some claimed that during these sessions, they heard faint melodic notes hidden within the hum patterns resembling ancient draconic chants. Whether these sounds were imagined or real mattered little. The experience deepened their devotion, reinforcing their belief that dragons left traces of their existence everywhere. In some temples, priests constructed vast galleries where stone panels depicted scenes of draconic creation. These galleries were dimly lit, with torches placed carefully to highlight the craftsmanship. The carvings showed dragons shaping mountains with their claws, dividing rivers with their wings, or breathing life into the skies through fire. Though metaphorical, these scenes reflected the cult's belief that dragons were tied to the very formation of the world. The stonework was so detailed that, even now, the smallest grooves resemble scales shimmering under torchlight. Visitors to these ruins often remark that the carved dragons seem to watch silently, their eyes following movements through the gallery as if waiting for forgotten rituals to resume. The cult's fascination with sound extended into their burial practices. They believed the spirits of the dead communicated through echoes, and for this reason, tombs were constructed with acoustics that amplified even the slightest noise. When a priest entered a burial chamber, their footsteps reverberated unnaturally, layering upon themselves as though several people walked with them. This effect was intentional. They believed it symbolized the presence of ancestral spirits walking alongside the living. In the largest burial chambers, domed ceilings caught and reflected sound in swirling patterns, producing faint whispers that lingered long after silence returned. Some modern explorers insist they've heard these whispers, words they cannot quite understand but feel somehow familiar, as though the ancient stone still remembers every voice that passed beneath it. The cult's relationship with dragons was complex, shaped equally by reverence and fear. While priests viewed dragons as divine, they also recognized the unpredictability of beings forged by raw power. Dragons did not think as mortals did. They possessed immense knowledge, but applied it through a lens shaped by agelessness and primal instinct. Priests learned to read subtle signs in a dragon's posture, small shifts in the wings, the angle of the head, the dilation of their pupils. A dragon's stillness could mean patience or impending fury. A flick of the tail might be approval, annoyance, or simply idle movement. Understanding these cues took years of study, and even then, mistakes happened. Yet when a dragon expressed genuine approval, the air around them grew warm and thrummed with a gentle vibration that priests described as indescribably comforting, like a deep, resonant assurance echoing through the bones. In the deepest chambers of ancient temples, priests kept elaborate maps etched into circular stone tables. These weren't maps of land or sky, but spiritual diagrams showing intersections of power flowing through Skyrim. The cult believed the world's life force pooled in certain locations, forming invisible currents that dragons could sense instinctively. These diagrams depicted swirling lines, nodes of energy, and pathways connecting them. Priests meditated at these tables, placing their hands on the carvings to feel the faint warmth radiating from the stone. They believed this warmth reflected the pulse of the world, slow, steady, and ancient. By studying these maps, priests attempted to predict where dragons might appear or where rituals would be most effective. Many of these diagrams still exist, though modern scholars can only guess at their meaning. Another forgotten tradition of the cult involved creating wind chimes fashioned from dragon bone fragments and enchanted metal rings. These chimes were hung in temple courtyards, where strong gusts of wind produced deep, resonant tones unlike any ordinary chime. The sound was haunting, with a depth that seemed to vibrate through the environment. Priests interpreted the movement of these chimes as divine messages. If they sang loudly under calm skies, it meant powerful dragons were passing unseen overhead. If they remained silent during high winds, it meant a dragon spirit slept nearby. These chimes continue to fascinate explorers today. Some ruined temples still hold remnants of them, and occasionally, when the wind turns just right, distant tones echo through abandoned halls, sending shivers down the spines of those who hear them. In coastal regions, the cult built shrines near cliffs overlooking the Sea of Ghosts. Unlike most temples, these shrines were simple structures consisting of stone pillars arranged in wide semicircles. They faced the ocean intentionally, allowing priests to listen to the rhythmic crashing of waves. The cult believed dragons were connected not only to the sky, but also to the sea, which they saw as a vast, shifting entity embodying both calm and chaos traits dragons understood intimately. During rituals, priests dipped dragonbone rods into tide pools, stirring patterns meant to mimic the swirling of dragon wings. They chanted softly to the rhythm of the ocean, their voices merging with the roar of water against stone. These sea shrines were among the few places where even ordinary followers felt comfortable, as the rituals there were gentle, shaped by the soothing nature of the tides. One of the most striking beliefs within the cult was that dragons remembered every moment of existence, carrying memories like shimmering threads woven through time. Because of this, priests believed memories could echo physically in the world. They spoke of memory stones, rare formations found only in certain mountainsides. These stones retained heat or cold strangely, shifting temperature in response to touch. When held, some stones produced faint vibrations, as though remembering distant roars or ancient rituals. Priests used these stones during meditation, believing they allowed access to fragments of draconic memory. Whether this was true or symbolic, the stones became cherished relics stored in temples protected by layers of enchantments and Draugr guardians. The cult's influence touched even the smallest details of daily life. Meals prepared for priests were simple but symbolic, often consisting of roasted grains shaped into spirals or soups stirred in clockwise patterns to reflect the cycle of time. Acolytes trained their bodies to move with controlled precision, mimicking the fluid motions of dragons. Tasks such as sweeping temple floors or preparing ritual tools were performed in synchronized groups, reinforcing the idea that all actions, mundane or sacred, should reflect harmony. Even conversation was regulated in certain temples. Priests were forbidden to speak casually within ceremonial halls, instead communicating through gestures designed to resemble the calm, sweeping movements of wings. The cult's decline left behind more than ruins. In isolated areas of Skyrim, villagers still tell tales of strange lights drifting across mountaintops on cold nights. These lights move slowly, trailing long arcs that resemble shimmering wings. Some believe these are remnants of draconic energy lingering from ancient rituals. Others think they are reflections of the auroras or tricks of the atmosphere. But those who grew up near old temples insist the lights mean something more, that they are signs of spirits watching from above, echoes of a bond between dragons and mortals that never fully dissolved. Even travelers unfamiliar with the cult sometimes stop in their tracks, staring up with a quiet sense of awe as the lights drift like silent guardians through the night sky. The final remnants of the dragon cult endure in the land itself. When snow settles heavily on certain ruins, it forms patterns resembling coiled dragons. When storms roll across the mountains, echoes sometimes linger longer than expected, bouncing strangely between cliffs as if shaped by ancient tongues. In the quiet moments just before dawn, the world feels unusually still near the remains of old temples, as though the air waits for something that once was. The cult may have vanished, and the dragons may have retreated or fallen silent, but the places they touched still breathe with subtle hints of what came before. These echoes, faint but persistent, remind all who wander Skyrim that the relationship between the land and the dragons was once profound, so profound that even centuries of snow, wind, and silence have not erased it. High in the mountains where the world feels thin and the air shivers with cold clarity, the dragon cult built meditation terraces carved into narrow ledges overlooking vast stretches of sky. These terraces were small, almost dangerously so, with just enough space for a priest to sit cross-legged at the cliff's edge. The cult believed that true communion with dragons required confronting the feeling of insignificance that came from looking out over endless horizons. The terraces forced priests to sit in silence, with nothing but the sky, the wind, and the distant echo of their own breath. Some described the experience as unsettling the sensation of the world, stretching infinitely outward, while the platform beneath them remained still and solid. Others found it deeply peaceful, convinced they felt the faint presence of dragons drifting on the air currents like shadows beyond sight. Below these terraces, winding paths sloped gently into cavern entrances marked only by a single carved spiral. These caverns were known as memory hollows, places where the cult believed the world stored experiences like layers of sediment. Inside, the walls glittered with mineral deposits shaped by dripping water over centuries. Priests who entered these hollows said the air felt heavier, as though saturated with ancient emotions. The faintest whispers could echo strangely, bending around corners and returning in distorted tones that sounded almost like distant voices. Acolytes sat in these hollows for hours with their eyes closed, trying to discern meaning from the strange acoustics. Some insisted they heard the voices of past priests murmuring instructions or warnings. Others described feeling watched, though not with malice, more like an ancient presence waiting patiently. In the heart of some temples, enormous circular platforms served as ritual stages where priests practiced the art of controlled shouting. Unlike the destructive shouts used in battle, these were soft, measured utterances spoken with precision. The goal was not to unleash power, but to guide it gently, like coaxing a flame instead of igniting one. The platform stones bore shallow grooves from centuries of vibration, forming intricate, swirling lines that resembled the flow of breath through a dragon's chest. When priests spoke in perfect harmony, the grooves shimmered faintly as dust lifted and hovered a few inches above the ground, suspended in still air. This was seen as a sign of success, a moment where the voice aligned so perfectly with the world's natural flow that the boundary between breath and matter blurred. Deep beneath these platforms lay chambers rarely visited, their doors sealed with runic locks that glowed faintly when touched. These were the vaults of reverie, spaces where priests studied dreams believed to be sent by dragons. Inside, the walls were painted with vivid pigments made from crushed flowers, ash, and enchanted minerals. The paintings depicted surreal landscapes, floating islands, coiling shapes drifting through starlit skies, and abstract patterns meant to mirror visions experienced in trance. Small pools of still water were placed throughout the chamber, each lined with dragon bone dust so that the water shimmered faintly even in darkness. Priests gazed into these pools while meditating, waiting for dreams to break across the reflective surface, like ripples spreading across reality. Above ground, the cult tended to massive gardens filled with plants chosen not for beauty, but for symbolic resonance. Some bloomed only during storms, their petals opening in response to thunder vibrations. Others grew in spiraling patterns that mirrored the shapes of dragonflight charts. These gardens were tended with extraordinary care. Priests used dragonbone-tipped tools to prune branches or aerate the soil. Even the water used for irrigation was infused with powdered minerals believed to carry traces of ancient magic. Visitors often reported that walking through these gardens felt like stepping into a dream, with scents shifting subtly in the breeze and flowers turning their heads in slow, almost intentional movements. Particularly revered among the cult's creations were the echo lanterns, ceremonial lanterns crafted from thin sheets of metal hammered until almost translucent. Inside each lantern hung a shard of enchanted stone that vibrated faintly when exposed to chanting. When lit, the lantern projected shifting shapes onto temple walls, patterns resembling wings, flames, or flowing runes. During nighttime ceremonies, dozens of these lanterns flickered in unison, casting moving shadows that formed hypnotic illusions. Priests believed the lanterns revealed glimpses of hidden truths, as though allowing mortals to see faint outlines of the world beyond perception. Some said the lanterns reacted to emotions, shining brighter when priests entered moments of deep clarity or dimming when doubt clouded the mind. In the more remote reaches of Skyrim, where glacial winds carved deep channels through stone, the dragon cult established frost sanctuaries designed to withstand brutal conditions. These sanctuaries used natural ice formations as structural supports, with thick walls grown from layers of frozen water. The cult enhanced these formations with enchantments that made the ice resonate when touched, producing clear, bell-like tones. Priests performed rituals that involved tapping specific ice pillars with carved mallets, creating melodies that echoed through the frozen chambers like crystal voices. The sound was haunting, beautiful, and strangely calming, as if the ice itself sang in a forgotten tongue. Some pillars glowed faintly from within, illuminated by ancient spells that trapped light, like insects caught in amber. Dragons were not passive figures. In this culture, they actively shaped rituals and traditions. Some dragons taught priests breathing techniques by demonstrating them atop mountain ridges, exhaling vast clouds of fog or smoke that expanded slowly across the air. The priests watched their timing, imitating the rise and fall of the great chest, the steady rhythm of breath that seemed to align with the heartbeat of the world. These lessons were considered sacred, and the patterns learned during them were incorporated into rites performed for generations. To breathe like a dragon was to understand patience, power, and presence all at once. The cult also maintained archives, known as the Murmuring Shelves, collections of scrolls stored in narrow alcoves carved into stone corridors. These alcoves were arranged in a spiral, so that walking through the archive felt like descending through layers of time. Each scroll was written in flowing script meant to mimic the shape of dragon wings mid-flight. When wind passed through cracks in the stone, it rustled the scrolls softly, creating a sound reminiscent of whispering spirits. Scribes claimed the shelves themselves guided their hands, steering quills towards certain phrases or symbols. Whether this influence was magical, psychological, or simply a product of deep immersion in their work, The effect was powerful enough that even modern scholars feel strangely compelled when standing among the ancient texts. Many temples featured courtyards where priests practiced their movements slow, deliberate motions inspired by the way dragons unfurled their wings or coiled their necks. These movements were not meant for combat, but for spiritual alignment. When performed at dawn, the rising sun cast long shadows behind each priest, making it appear as though the courtyard housed a gathering of dragons rather than humans. The harmony of motion was soothing to watch and even more soothing to perform. Some believed that through these movements, they could momentarily align their souls with the vast, ancient consciousness of dragonkind. The cult's understanding of the world extended beyond the visible. They believed in breath currents, streams of invisible energy flowing through the land. Dragons, with their mastery of the voice, were able to sense and manipulate these currents instinctively. Priests spent years learning to feel the faintest shifts in the air, using subtle cues: the twitch of a flame, the swirl of dust, or the temperature of stone beneath the hand. When they sensed these currents strongly enough, they performed rituals to redirect them, believing it allowed dragon spirits easier passage through the world. Temples built along breath currents seemed to hum faintly even without chanting, as though constantly resonating with energy that never left. The cult's reverence for dragons was so deep that they also collected stories of dragons' emotional lives. They believed dragons could experience joy in flight, sorrow in solitude, or pride in teaching mortals. These emotions were documented in carvings and poems stored in secret chambers. One poem described the sound of a dragon's heart as the thunder that waits behind silence. Another claimed that dragons mourned by circling mountaintops in perfect spirals, letting their wingtips brush against snow as a final tribute to fallen kin. Whether these descriptions were symbolic or drawn from real observations is unknown, but they reveal the cult's desire to understand dragons not as distant gods, but as beings with inner worlds as vast as the skies they ruled. Even outside temples, traces of the cult's worldview persisted. In remote villages, elders still whisper about dragon warmth, moments in winter when sudden gusts of strangely warm wind slip through mountain passes. These gusts arrive without explanation and vanish just as quickly. Villagers claim the warmth is a sign of dragons passing unseen overhead, their bodies stirring the air as memories ripple through time. Travelers who feel the warmth often pause without knowing why, as though some ancient instinct inside them recognizes the touch of forgotten power. In the end, the dragon cult's influence remains not through its temples or its rituals, but through the atmosphere that clings to Skyrim itself. In the silence of snow-covered ruins, in the strange echoes that drift through barrows, in the deep stillness of mountain air, the world holds fragments of their belief. The cult may have fallen long ago, but the echoes of their devotion linger like the soft thrum of wings just beyond sight, quiet, steady, eternal. Among the highest reaches of ancient Skyrim, far above the timberline where winds sculpt ridges into frozen crests, the dragon cult carved silent sanctuaries directly into the mountain faces. These sanctuaries weren't meant for worship with crowds or ceremony. They existed for quiet reflection, places where a single priest could sit in near total silence, interrupted only by the faint rattle of snow drifting across stone. Some sanctuaries were nothing more than narrow alcoves, barely large enough to shelter a kneeling figure. Others were vast, echoing balconies suspended above deep valleys. The cult believed that dragons favored solitude, and these secluded spaces helped priests understand the quiet, watchful nature their masters embraced. When fog rolled over the peaks, these sanctuaries vanished into the white, becoming indistinguishable from the cliffs themselves, as though swallowed whole by the sky. Below the highest sanctuaries, narrow tunnels wound through the mountains like veins. These tunnels connected different parts of the temple complexes, but they also served ceremonial purposes. Acolytes walked these tunnels in single file during rites of reflection, as the twisting passages forced them to move slowly and deliberately. Some sections were so narrow that only one person could pass at a time, causing the walls to press inward as if testing their resolve. The tunnels amplified sound in strange ways. A single breath could echo like a whisper spoken right behind one's ear. Even the soft scrape of robes against stone produced gentle harmonics that followed acolytes as they walked. Priests taught that these echoes weren't mere acoustics. They believed the stone held memory, carrying traces of ancient rituals performed there long before. Deep within these mountains existed chambers known as the still rooms. These chambers absorbed sound completely, leaving no echoes at all. Even loud footsteps landed without resonance. Voices remained confined to the throat, never reaching the walls. The effect was unsettling at first. Those who entered described the silence as heavy, like being submerged underwater. But for priests trained in meditation, the still rooms offered the perfect setting for introspective practices. They believed the lack of echo stripped away worldly distractions, allowing them to focus entirely on their breath and inner voice. Many priests entered these chambers to prepare for major rituals, emerging hours later with calm expressions, as though they had stepped briefly outside the flow of time. The cult's spiritual practices weren't limited to mountain sanctuaries. In warmer regions, they built sun halls, broad, open structures designed to capture sunlight and flood their interiors with a warm, golden glow. These halls featured polished stone floors, etched with swirling patterns representing wind currents and flame paths. When sunlight poured through the wide openings, it traced these patterns with perfect precision, making them appear alive. Priests gathered in these halls during the changing of seasons, letting the warmth seep into their bones. They believed sunlight carried faint remnants of draconic energy from times when dragons soared freely across the sky, their wings cutting through sunbeams. Standing in the golden light, priests raised their hands in slow arcs, mimicking the ascent of dragons into the sky. In colder regions, the cult constructed moon chambers, circular rooms open to the night sky through a domed aperture. During full moons, the light entered at specific angles that illuminated stone inscriptions around the chamber's interior. These inscriptions described the phases of the moon as reflections of draconic temperament. A waxing moon represented a dragon gathering strength. A waning moon symbolized reflection and renewal. A new moon indicated stillness, the calm before power reawakened. Priests performed rituals during each phase, aligning their breathing patterns with the movement of moonlight across the chamber's floor. Some rituals involved lying flat on the cold stone and watching the stars rotate slowly above, believing each star represented a spark of ancient draconic essence drifting through the heavens. In the marshlands, where fog drifted like a living presence, the dragon cult shaped rituals around water. They built whisper pools, shallow basins carved into the ground and filled with water drawn from specific streams known for their clarity. Priests gathered around these pools at dawn, speaking soft phrases intended to carry meaning through ripples. When spoken correctly, the words caused tiny waves to form concentric circles that reflected torchlight in mesmerizing patterns. Priests used these patterns to interpret the intentions of dragon spirits associated with water and mist. If the circles remained smooth and symmetrical, it meant the spirit approved. If they rippled unevenly, the priests believed it signaled unrest or imbalance in the natural world. Even outside ceremonial contexts, the cult's influence touched the fabric of everyday life. Craftsmen trained by the cult decorated their pottery with spiral motifs inspired by dragon wings. They used special dyes extracted from rare mountain plants, creating colors that shimmered subtly when turned in the light. Cloth woven for priests incorporated thread tinted with crushed gems, producing garments that seemed to glint like dragon scales. Homes in villages loyal to the cult displayed carved wooden panels depicting stylized dragons in flight, their bodies coiling like waves. These designs weren't just decoration, they served as reminders of the power watching over the land. Dragons themselves sometimes visited these settlements, though such appearances were rare and often unpredictable. When a dragon approached, the air changed dramatically. Birds fell silent, trees stilled. Even the wind shifted direction, flowing in long, steady breaths as though mirroring the rhythm of enormous wings. Villagers stepped aside reverently as dragons descended, their massive bodies stirring dust and snow with the force of their landing. Priests approached slowly, bowing their heads before addressing the dragon in quiet, measured tones. Dragons rarely responded with words. Instead, they communicated through low rumbles or subtle gestures, tilting their heads, tightening or relaxing their wings, or exhaling gently to indicate acknowledgement. These encounters were moments of profound significance, leaving entire communities trembling with awe long after the dragon departed. The cult's understanding of dragons extended to their perception of time. They believed dragons experienced existence in elongated, sweeping arcs, remembering events not as separate moments, but as simultaneous layers of experience. To better understand this perspective, priests studied cyclical phenomena in nature seasons, tides, migrations of animals. They recorded these cycles meticulously on stone tablets arranged in circular patterns. Some cycles aligned with the appearances of specific dragons, suggesting a rhythm connecting dragons to the world's natural movements. Priests used this knowledge to anticipate when particular dragons might return, treating these cycles as sacred patterns written into the fabric of reality. This belief in cyclical time also shaped their interpretation of history. Priests believed that events repeated in subtle forms, echoing through centuries like distant thunder. Wars, alliances, and cultural shifts were seen not as isolated incidents, but as reverberations of ancient truths. They carved spirals into the walls of their tombs to represent this pattern, each loop symbolizing an age, each turn representing the rise and fall of civilizations. Some spirals were so large that they wrapped around entire chambers, creating a dizzying effect when lit by torchlight. Priests walked these spirals during meditation, tracing their fingers along the grooves and contemplating the repetition of fate. The cult's fascination with stone extended to the creation of resonance monoliths, tall, narrow pillars placed at strategic points across Skyrim. These monoliths were carved with runes that reacted to sound. When the wind struck them at certain angles, they produced deep, humming notes that rolled across the landscape. Some monoliths were placed intentionally to communicate with each other, forming networks of sound that carried messages over long distances. Priests stood near these monoliths during storms to listen for unusual harmonics, interpreting them as signs of draconic influence. Even today, travelers sometimes report low vibrations near ruined monoliths, though no one knows whether the sound is natural or something older stirring beneath the surface. Within temple archives, the cult preserved intricate diagrams illustrating draconic flight patterns. These diagrams contained sweeping arcs and sharp spirals that marked the trails dragons took through the sky. Priests believed these patterns were deliberate, reflecting the dragon's understanding of air currents and energy flows. Some diagrams map the exact times certain dragons circled mountaintops, suggesting a purposeful rhythm governing their flights. Modern scholars who study these diagrams often remark on their elegance, describing them as more akin to celestial charts than practical documents. The cult also trained select priests in the art of interpreting dragon dreams. These dreams were believed to drift across the world like mist, accessible to those with a sufficiently calm mind. Priests recorded their visions on scrolls known as breath scripts, written with ink made from crushed petals and soot. The scripts contained flowing lines and symbols inspired by the shapes of fire, wings, and wind. Some describe dragons flying through impossible landscapes, mountains suspended in the sky, oceans ignited by streaks of flame, forests where each tree hummed with energy. Priests believed these dream landscapes reflected truths about the world's hidden structure, glimpses into the deeper reality dragons perceived. And throughout all of it, through the rituals, the carvings, the chants, the flickering lanterns, the humming monoliths, the dragon cult remained firmly devoted to understanding their masters. Though time has buried their temples beneath snow and moss, the echoes of their devotion linger quietly in Skyrim's bones. In the strange warmth of a stone caught in shadow, in the distant roar that drifts across a valley with no clear source, in the stillness that falls over ancient ruins just before dawn, their presence can still be felt. The cult may have vanished long ago, but its memory lives on in the land itself, whispering in the wind just softly enough for those who listen to hear.